What is up, and welcome to the Cleveland Browns team preview. Coming up on today's show, we're going to talk about our favorite moves of the offseason, least favorite moves of the offseason, kind of what we're doing from a fantasy perspective, who are we trading for, who are we trading away, who are we holding, all those good things. In 2020, this Cleveland Browns team took a major jump with the coach of the year, Kevin Stefanski. A lot of exciting things going on, but it's a brand new year, and the Cleveland Browns have got to come back and repeat what they just did, and hopefully be able to get even a little bit further. So to help us break down the Bills and talk about everything we should know about what they did over the offseason and what to expect in 2021 and beyond are some really smart football people. I'm joined by Matt Waldman, RSP Football Guys. You guys know him, Christian Williams, Fantasy Pros, The Cut, all kind of places. And of course, DLF's own Josh Brickner. And we will be right back to break all that down in just a minute. Kicking things off, exciting. Henry in here telling us this is the Browns' year to finally make the Super Bowl. Henry,
my man Henry.
Yeah, right. You guys probably should know Henry. Henry is
we all know Henry.
Yeah, that's right. Took down some pretty big events here in the past. So appreciate you tuning in, Henry. And could it be the Browns' year? Certainly have the offensive line to run behind and operate behind to make a big run. Well, what else did they maybe do? We're going to break all that down, and starting, Christian, I appreciate you joining the show. Tell everybody what you're working on these days, where they can find you, all that good stuff.
You can find me at C Williams NFL, and what I'm working on is just a lot. I'm finally working through my final projections for 2021. I actually just started the 2022 NFL draft guide over the last couple of days. So I'm also going to be breaking down all of my projections and rankings like that. You can find all that at The Cut FFB on Twitter or thecutffb.com. But a lot of stuff coming. We've got a team full of contributors that are doing much more than I am. So shout out to all the contributors over at The Cut.
Yeah, appreciate you taking time, and looking forward to all that work. You definitely, dude, you put in as much work as almost anybody that I know. Maybe present company excluded, because I know these guys do too. Josh, I know you're here at DLF, but any articles that you have recently? And you also you do some Cleveland Browns podcast work too, don't you?
Yeah, I do a little We did a Browns podcast last year, hoping to bring that up. We did a weekly podcast over at Cleveland Sports Collective. Excited for that. For DLF, what I'm going to do this year is I did one of those Ultra Flex drafts through Safe League. And I kind of broke down that draft process for anyone that's not familiar. That's where you have 0 starting requirements at every position, so you can kind of build a unique squad. So I'm gonna every other week kind of give an update on the season. What works, what's not, and things like that. And hoping to dive in. Gonna write a sleeper series article on Deontay Harris for the Saints, and then probably one on our man Donovan Peoples-Jones for the Browns. So
very cool.
For DLF, yeah.
Matt, if anybody missed it, Matt told some wonderful stories on the Dynasty Vipers pod the other day, the Vipercast. It was a lot of fun hearing about some of those stories and the time that he outshined John Elway. You'll have to go catch the episode for that. Matt, you're out of your cave with the RSP work. Have you started working on next year?
I already have, yeah, and just posted a 20-minute breakdown of Sam Howell. There'll probably be a film room that I have going on with Mark Schofield. We'll be looking at Spencer Radler. Certainly been breaking down prospects on my YouTube channel, Matt Waldman's RSP Film Room, and at my site, www.mattwaldmanrsp.com. And then you can catch the Gut Check, which is closing in on, I think, number 600 probably by the end of the year. And I'm looking at, I think I'm probably going to do something on Sam Darnold. Just did something on Emmanuel Sanders. Why, maybe the ageist might be overreacting a little bit to him, or why you should maybe take the risk in the late rounds, and maybe why DeAndre Swift is a guy that maybe you should be pumping the brakes just a little bit on, as an idea of him being a running back one in fantasy. So you can find all that work there, and of course you have the dynasty projections that are available and updated throughout the year. 2-year projections, as well as rankings for different types of builds at mattwaldmanrsp.com.
And if that's not enough, Matt's been doing breakdowns on like LaDainian Tomlinson and some of those guys for the best. It was awesome. And check out his podcast. It's really good work. So, but hey, we're not here to talk about that. Let's talk about the Browns and 2021 and beyond. So, look, a lot of things changed over the course of the offseason. It's not exactly the same team that the Browns had, although there's some continuity. Christian, let's start with you. What's your favorite move that the Cleveland Browns made over the offseason?
Yeah, super not fantasy relevant at all, because what the Browns really needed was to beef up that defense. And my favorite specifically was John Johnson, the signing of John Johnson, one of the best safeties in the league. And I know that's people haven't really come around on that until they actually dig in and watch this kid play. And then when you listen to his opening presser, you can tell that he's going to provide a ton of leadership to that defensive room, which is very necessary if the Browns want to take the next step. So I'm very excited to see how they deploy him. I think we're going to see some 3 safety sets this year with Grant Delpit hopefully coming back, which is going to be really, really exciting in this defense. So that was definitely my favorite. Jadeveon Clowney is an honorable mention, but I wasn't entirely thrilled with that. John Johnson takes the cake.
Yeah, I love that. John Johnson, Troy Hill, a couple of guys added to the secondary there. Really good. Yeah, Matt, let's toss it over to you. What is your favorite move of the offseason?
I'll roll with Jadeveon Clowney on that particular front, and mainly because he can be a terror as a run stopper, as a playmaker. He can be a little reactive, and that can cause teams to be able to use a little misdirection in their favor against Cleveland. But the fact that he's lining up opposite Myles Garrett, you have Billings kind of stuff in the middle there, and you have a team that can run the ball and play ahead, and then you can allow this team to kind of pin its ears back and have playmakers. Clowney's a guy that he doesn't have to be the man in the same way in Houston. He didn't have to be the man with Watt opposite him. So I'm hoping that paired with himself and Takaris McKinley, who's a guy who is a promising pass rusher I've covered in Atlanta for years, who certainly can help out on that front. You've got some interchangeable parts with those two that I think can be very helpful to the Cleveland front line.
Josh, how about you? What do you think? What's your favorite move of the offseason for the Browns?
I love the two that were already mentioned. On my Browns podcast, if there's any Andrew Sendejo fans, I apologize, but we used to have, and I was about to say Anthony Walker, but to follow up on John Johnson, we used to have a list called the Sendejo list. That would be our negative reactions from the game. So I'm not sorry to see Andrew Sendejo go. Loved Anthony Walker signing, kind of buckle down that linebacker position. Any team, when their season's on the line, that gives up 13.5 yards to Chad Henne running the ball on 3rd and 14 probably needs to strengthen its linebacking core. So I know none of these are fancy related, but I mean, our defense was pathetic. Not pathetic, it was troublesome outside of a few guys. So that is huge. If we really want to be a Super Bowl contender, those are the moves we had to make. I also loved I was actually at the draft in Cleveland and went crazy when we made the Greg Newsome pick. So I think that's a fantastic pick to lock down that secondary. As last season, no lead was safe. Even a 28-0 lead to the Steelers, I was still sweating in the playoffs. So.
And those moves are big, right? Because and you guys are saying not necessarily fantasy related, but certainly having a team where the defense can perform better tends to seem like, maybe you guys have done a study on this that proves it wrong, but I guess narrative would say it's going to help the run game, right? And certainly the Cleveland Browns have a very strong one. And so, I think some of those moves can be very fantasy relevant, even if it's not necessarily the player itself that they added who's going to add value to it. So I love those calls. I love the moves for the Browns. Certainly as a football team, I think they definitely got better over the course of the offseason. They didn't add a lot of offensive weapons, though, and that's part of why we couldn't mention that in the favorite move of the offseason. Maybe it's just the lack of adding to that, but it could be whatever you think. Josh, we'll go right back to you. What's your least favorite move of the offseason?
I will say my least favorite move, I got to stay on defense, unfortunately, is when they let go of Sheldon Richardson. I think it made the tackle position very – I hate to say it's our weakest position, but it might be at the time. As a Buckeye homer, love Tommy Togiai, but can you expect him to hop in right away? So I don't love the trying to lowball Sheldon Richardson in the contract negotiations. I know they thought they could cut him and bring him back at a cheaper price. They haven't been able to. So I'm a little worried about the defensive tackle position. I know we didn't but I think that offensive continuity is better than bringing in a lot of new guys. I know they brought in Anthony Schwartz in the draft, but this is Baker Mayfield's first time to have the same offensive coaching staff. I'm sure we'll get into it later. Going, in his professional career, and that's huge for all the turnover we have here in Cleveland usually. So the fact that we have the same offensive staff and personnel coming back is huge. And I think on a positive side, we also added a lot more depth to the offensive line, getting James Hudson in the draft. Kendall Lamb was on the exempt list last year. In the Browns, they had a great offensive line, but depth was an issue last year with injuries.
I love that you said that, and because that's why we like to do these shows. Like I love no one pays attention to the Cleveland Browns more than Cleveland Browns fans. Even if you're an analyst and you love football, like this is your team. Like I'm a Saints fan. Like I have the Saints and I have the Red Zone on when I'm watching football on Sunday. I'm sure you got the Browns and Red Zone when you're watching it. So like little things like that, little nuggets like that, like, hey, first time he's got the same offensive coordinator 2 years in a row. That's like a little nugget that I love to pick up on these things. Matt, what do you think? Is there obviously you wanted Trey Lance to fall. That wasn't going to happen. What else was your least favorite move of the offseason?
Well, I think that I like the Sheldon Richardson point that was just made. I think that was a good astute analysis, and certainly let's go explore some things that I guess I'd say I'd have mixed feelings about. I have mixed feelings about John Johnson being added because as good as he is, I loved Grant Delpit coming out of school, but at the same time, the addition of John Johnson might free up Grant Delpit to be a little bit more of a playmaker, depending on how imaginative the defense can be and whether he's healthy enough to return. If he's healthy enough, that's the key. That's the key. And if he can, then you have a playmaker on a level that could be an all-pro level type of player, especially put into a position where he can be just used to be a little bit more attacking and instinctive and be kind of a rover in that sense. So there's that. But if I were to just pick a mixed feelings, I'd say their draft at the second half of the draft. I was not a fan of their skill selection picks. I didn't think Demetric Felton. I don't like gadget players, and I think Demetric Felton is a guy that they're not going to be able to decide whether he's a running back or a wide receiver. He showed some good receiving skills at the Senior Bowl, but I'm not a big fan of his decision-making as a runner, and if you're not a good decision-maker at this stage of the game, it's tough to improve that at a certain level now. And then with Schwartz, speed's great, but to me, speed is kind of like, I'll just say that it's the thing that's overemphasized in the league a good bit. Cal's laughing at me because he knows what I was thinking, and but it's overemphasized a bit, and I just think that they could probably pick players who could be more well-rounded and offer you a little bit more promise, as opposed to now you're sticking to guys who are going to be the promise is there due to athletic ability, but not necessarily due to what they could develop into as all-around players.
That's good. Christian, what do you think?
Yeah, I actually was going to say Anthony Schwartz, and I will say I've come around on it. And the reason I've come around just a little bit is they don't have something like that in the offense, right? But does Anthony Schwartz even have a place in this offense? I don't know. I know Baker can throw deep. That's one of his best strengths. But is Anthony Schwartz going to be good enough to – I know he's fast, but I don't know that he can actually separate getting downfield. So maybe just to take some attention off of the underneath stuff for Odell and Jarvis. But if I'm looking at the Anthony Schwartz pick, Amon-Ra St. Brown was there. And that's a receiver that profiles similarly to Jarvis Landry, in my opinion, where like he can work that underneath. And so Jarvis Landry, you can get out of his contract next year. I think it would have been a smarter move to get a guy that profiles like Jarvis rather than someone. And here's the thing, and I'm sure we'll touch on him a little bit later. Donovan Peoples-Jones really emerged, and there are rumors that he could cement himself as the wide receiver 3 on this team. And so then that Schwartz pick looks even more luxurious. And that's not something I know it might just be strange because being a Browns fan, I've never seen a luxury pick ever in my life. But
It's true. He's right.
you know, like
been a while.
He's right.
we've tried to make luxury picks happen, and they just never seem to work out. So I'm hesitant on it. If Anthony Schwartz does put it all together, though, that is something that they don't currently have. So, like Matt said, mixed feelings, kind of lukewarm on it, but probably my least favorite.
Let's switch over to talk, a little bit more about the fantasy angle of this, and kind of a buy sell trade type question, right? Where we're trying to figure out who to acquire, but I guess talk about the wide receivers too, because you mentioned Anthony Schwartz there, Christian. I'll just come right back to you. I mean, you get Odell Beckham back with Baker Mayfield. There are mixed reports about how people feel about that. How do you feel about that, and the Donovan Peoples-Jones and the rest of the options that he has?
I would like to start off by when I was kind of reading up just a few little Browns things, and I saw someone said that the running back room is going to be a training camp battle. That's not true. The running back room is set. It is Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. No. There's no battle. Nick Chubb is the starter, right? But the wide receiver room, that's where I feel like it's wide open. Odell. I am someone who very much so still believes in Odell Beckham. We saw flashes of it early on last year before the injury, and we had an inexperienced Baker in a new offense that he really hadn't clicked with Odell ever, and he was learning a second new offense. Well, this year, Odell has reportedly been operating at 100% for a while now, and they've been working out together. And so I have a feeling that connection will finally come to fruition, which the Browns need it. The Browns need Odell to be good. Where the Browns need him to be good, though, I believe is not in the let's run 9 routes with Odell all the time, which is where Donovan Peoples-Jones comes in as well, because he's a guy that he gets sneaky separate. He's not a great separator yet, but he does run a 9 route that people pay attention to. And so of those guys, who am I looking to acquire? Odell for sure, especially when you look at his ADP and how people are viewing Odell right now. He's being drafted in Dynasty as like the wide receiver 34 or 35 right now.
35.
And yeah. And so if that's the case, then that means that you can go get Odell at a huge discount. And then coupling that, Baker Mayfield, he's being drafted at quarterback 18. I think that's pretty much the floor of where he'll live here as long as the Browns do re-sign him in this Stefanski offense. So those are two definite trade targets of mine. If you guys follow me on Twitter, you'll know I beat the Baker Mayfield drum, that he's actually a good quarterback, and we saw the second half what he can be, and I'm excited to see it in 2021.
Josh, you mentioned Donovan Peoples-Jones as well, and I just looked up, and DLF's ADP has him as the wide receiver 107 in startup.
That's a crime. It is. If you just sorry to kind of jump in, but if you look at his, I just think he's kind of a pick that you make. Yes, he has turned some heads in camp, might end up being the wide receiver 3, but no matter what, I think what you get from him this year in Dynasty is a huge bonus, because you got to think next year, OBJ's dead cap number is 0, I believe, when I was doing research. So I don't think he's on the team in 2022. So DPJ could take a huge step, and Jarvis's contract, that's not a guarantee for 2022 either. So DPJ could very much end up being one of the top receivers on this team in the next few years. Also, I could not agree more with the OBJ pick. I was just looking at the DLF trade finder, and for one of the last few trades for Beckham, he was traded straight up for Tyler Higbee, and it doesn't seem to be a tight end premium. Also, he was traded for Marquise Brown in a 2nd-round pick next year. So I always say in Dynasty, you have to look if you're a contender or not. I think if you're a contender, you want to grab OBJ and the Jarvis Landrys of the world, because these are guys that can be one of your 10th, 11th starters on a contending Dynasty team that can really help you win separate weeks. And to kind of go with what Christian said, sorry I'm getting a little long-winded, Baker Mayfield is the perfect QB2 in Superflex, because he has that floor. He's going to have a pretty safe floor. His TD interception ratio was 11-1, I think, over the final 6-7 games last year. So I just feel like that's what we're going to see this year as he got more comfortable in the offense. And if I'm in some Superflex leagues, Baker is the great QB2. He might never be that top 5 option because they're run first team, but I think people are going to be very impressed with where Baker finishes this year fantasy wise.
Matt, we've talked about offensive schemes before, and Kevin Stefanski is a smart offensive coordinator, and I think part of the questions when he came over from the Vikings was, is he going to have a similar, low pass attempts, high rush attempts type scheme? And he, if you look at the season long numbers, he did, but it seemed like towards the end of the season he started trusting Baker a lot more. Is that what you saw?
I think that, and I think that they were efficient, and you also have to look at the teams that they faced. I mean, after week 10, Houston was the worst defense in the league. Philadelphia wasn't far behind. Jacksonville wasn't far behind. Tennessee, they're mediocre. Baltimore can be decent at times, but they had some weaknesses and injury. The Giants was a stronger unit, was getting better, a little bit underrated. The Jets, so-so. So other than maybe the Ravens, the Giants, and Pittsburgh, there were some really weak defenses out there. Now, on that note, while that may mean why Cleveland wants to see where Baker progresses this year before they sign him to that deal, if they decide to re-sign him, and I think they will, it'll take him falling apart for them not to do it. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's going to happen. So I'm totally in agreement with these two guys about Odell Beckham. I mean, the idea that Odell Beckham is getting traded for Marquise Brown or Tyler Higbee is that's crazy. Yeah. I mean, that's legitimately ridiculous, and that ridiculous value that you should be taking, because as Christian mentioned earlier, which is, they never really were on the same page, different scheme. And when you watch them on the field, you would see that Baker would be constantly a step behind or a step ahead of Beckham, which means that he's thinking an extra beat that he shouldn't be. And now that they have a little bit more rapport, you should see more pinpoint passes in that direction. And this is honestly a 2-receiver, 2 tight end offense, more than it is a 3-receiver offense. Though I appreciate Josh's point about DPJ, because I've been holding that guy for 2 years, because he's a great prospect in terms of what he can offer on the field. It's just a matter of whether he was going to work at it, whether he lands in the right system, and his time could be coming, as perfectly outlined. So for me, I'm there with OBJ, and I'm also there with Nick Chubb, just because, surprise. But the reason being is that when you look at his game logs, even last year with the big threat of Kareem Hunt, what most people don't understand, unless they're longtime Cleveland fans, is that Cleveland has always kind of had a 2-back identity when they were really good. And I think they kind of had that in mind. And when you look at that, other than the Dallas game, Nick Chubb didn't have 80 yards other than week 1, week 15, and week 16. And he had a touchdown in every game other than week 1, the week he got hurt against Dallas in the first half, and against Philadelphia, where he still ran for 114 yards. I mean, so this is a guy that a lot of people want. They want the dominant guy when they pick in round 1. I find that's a huge mistake sometimes. Sometimes you should just be, instead of shooting for bullseyes, you should be trying to hit the target. And to me, there's no better guy that you just say, listen, I'm going to plug him in, and he's going to be the baseline for what a starter should be for me, week in and week out. And if he has a good week, that's a 2-3 touchdown week with 150 yards, and I'm golden. But I would rather have that than the guy that we're hoping might do that, like Joe Mixon or last year Miles Sanders, who've never done it before and don't have the ability that Nick Chubb has. So Mixon's pretty good.
Matt, you mentioned the tight ends there, and I want to stick with that for just a second. And we got a question here from Z2 Fantasy. Do we think Harrison Bryant takes a leap in targets and receptions this year? And I know you think there's a possibility he could be the most talented tight end on the team. Not that he necessarily is right now, but he's kind of blocked. Like, what do you think about Harrison? Is he somebody that we should be looking to acquire?
I think you can take him very late or off the waiver wire in most leagues and get away with that and be fine with monitoring his camp. Because what most likely will happen is that with those 3 players, they're all good receivers in the red zone, though I would say Bryant is the best. Hooper's not far behind. And then Njoku is up and down as a player. But, Njoku's the best athlete, with Harrison behind that, and then Hooper third. But when you're talking about blocking, you're going to want Hooper in there. I mean,
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
Hooper's really the number one right now. And that means that Harrison is really a guy, when they spread the field out, he's going to
He'll
work
be
the
there.
slot, and he'll be there. He'll be a nice kind of luxury target, or like check down target that you'll see. And he was open a lot in the red zone, and there were some plays that Mayfield would probably have liked to have had back. And it's an acclimation process for them because he was a rookie too. So I think that we'll see a little more efficiency from him, but he's not a fantasy guy right now. He's more of a training camp monitor. And then you keep him on your short list of tight ends you want off the waiver wire if there's an injury.
Christian, I'm gonna come over to you for the first part of this next question. Certainly we want to look to acquire some Browns. I would expect them to have as good an offensive season this year as they've had, but maybe there's some people that get a little bit too hyped, and you can look to trade them. What do you think? Who are you looking on this Browns team to trade away?
I have two guys, and one I feel more strongly about, so I'll start with him. It's Jarvis Landry. And the reason it's Jarvis Landry is because I think that safe floor that we've seen from Jarvis Landry is going to trickle away throughout this season. With Odell finally being on the same page as Baker, the thing that Jarvis had going for him was that Jarvis was the safety net. Well, in this offense, Jarvis really isn't the safety net anymore. The safety net, in my opinion, will be the tight end one, because that's pretty much the number one target. And then obviously you have Odell. With Jarvis Landry, though, where he's being drafted and where he's being valued, you can get some good players. And realistically, if you hold on to Jarvis, you're going to hold too long because, like I said, I think that happens throughout this year. But you can probably get Darnell Mooney and Darnell Mooney plus. You can take a flyer on Jalen Reagor, who I probably wouldn't take a flyer on Jalen Reagor, but if you like Jalen Reagor, go for it. That's get younger, get rid of Jarvis now before he's not on the Browns next year. That's a potential outcome as well. And then you have a very, very unclear situation. You could be looking at something like Emmanuel Sanders, where you've got an aging wide receiver that's incorporating into a new offense. That is something I'm just trying to get out of as much as I can. The other one is actually Kareem Hunt, because I don't think if Nick Chubb is healthy last year, I know that if Nick Chubb stays healthy, Kareem Hunt doesn't finish as an RB1. And Kareem Hunt, he still has pass catching value. He still has value within this offense, but for how long? Nick Chubb, I think, deserves the bulk of the work on the ground, and Kareem can be in there on third downs, and he can still get that pass catching work. But I think there's definite opportunity for regression for Kareem Hunt. And right now, I wouldn't say it's peak value because he could go elsewhere and be a stud. I'm just not willing to hold for that long because his contract runs, I believe, for the next 2 years. And so I'd get out now and get a wide receiver or someone that can impact my team a little bit more currently. So
11 touchdowns from him last year. Certainly, when you think of that, I don't really think of him as a backup running back, but if you wanted to call him that, 11 touchdowns seems like a number that might be too high. But I'm also torn because he could be, super valuable in leagues as well. If the dominoes break the right way, if Nick Chubb wins the lottery or something, decides not to play football anymore. Josh, what do you think? Do you have anybody else that you might be looking to trade away, or any thoughts on what Christian said?
I have to agree a little bit with Christian on the Kareem Hunt point, and really talking with what Matt said about Nick Chubb is that through the end of the year last year and when it was crunch time, the Browns really started to use Nick Chubb more in the passing game on screens because defense were getting tipped off. Oh, well, when Chubb's in the game, it's a pass, you're not going to use him. He's kind of, you're running the ball or it's a play action. So they really got him incorporated more. He had that long screen pass against Pittsburgh in the playoffs for a touchdown. So I really think that Nick Chubb becomes more involved in the passing game this year, and people who think, oh, he's a 2-down back are just going to be disappointed I think he has top 5 potential. What was the RB10 last year, RB9, and missed 4 games. So I think if he stays healthy, he's top 5 all the way. I do agree. I agree and disagree a little bit with Jarvis Landry. I think on a contender, he's the guy who's going to help you, like I said, this year. But I do understand for the future. Yeah, if I'm not a contender, I would absolutely try and get him off my roster now. If there's a Browns fan like me in your league, trade him away. We might be willing to pay a little higher. Jarvis doesn't really have the future potential. Yeah, there's a lot more question marks than you'd like. But I think Jarvis's price is right if you're a contender and you can get him at the right ADP or the right price in a trade.
He's 28. He feels like he's 38 sometimes. Because I feel like we've been talking
Right.
about him forever. But came out of LSU. Him and Odell, and seem to have made a pretty good tandem when they've been on the field together to a degree. Matt, what do you think? Any thoughts on? I know you love Chubb. I know you love Kareem Hunt. To a degree as well, and how they're in this backfield. Best offensive line in the NFL, maybe though, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think it is, at least for the run game. And I think also just for the way the scheme fit is. I mean, they drafted well, they picked well in free agency to be able to build this line the way they should for what they're going to run. And then when you look at Landry, I agree with both assessments, really, because as I was listening to Christian talk, I'm thinking, well, I actually, as a player, I think Jalen Reagor was misused. And I was told by Fran Duffy with the Eagles.com that basically the Eagles called up Gary Patterson at TCU and said, how did you use him? They said, we misused him. This is the way you should use him is more in the short game and not throw him in the deep game and have him make a contested catches. And the Eagles went right ahead and used him in the way that Gary Patterson misused him. and I heard from Fran that they were planning to ameliorate that this year. But again, you have Jalen Hurts, who I think can be a very productive fantasy player, but I'm not sure if I feel totally comfortable about Reagor from that perspective. So it's from a dynasty perspective, I'd still might make the deal if I get Mooney and him as change along with that. So I totally get where Christian's coming from. At the same time, I look at him, and as Josh said, at 28 years old, this is a guy that never relied on speed to be a big time player. So when I started looking at players when I studied Emmanuel Sanders and guys who basically played past 34 and had top 20, top 10 seasons. And he fits the profile. He's a slot receiver. He's short but quick, but not very fast. But he has glue hands and he knows how to get open. And so this is a guy that I think that you can probably get another 3 to 5 years out of him and feel pretty darn good about it. But at the same time, if there's anybody I'm going to trade, and it would probably be Baker Mayfield to Browns fans. And just because Browns fans, I mean, we are a group that gets very excited at the prospect of where we are. It's been a while, and I like what Mayfield did last year after the Baltimore opener. He stunk up the Baltimore opener, and then he progressively got better each week. Now, while I think some of that is aided by the teams that he played, he had some very strong moments. He showed progressive improvement in the pocket, which is what I had concerns about with him. And I think that the team that he's and the continuity is, as both of these guys argued, are very good. But I think at its core, this team has a strong enough defense, a great run game, that they're not going to need to throw the ball as much, even against tougher teams. So while Baker will probably have, multiple QB1 efforts, I don't think he'll finish as a QB1 in 12-team leagues. And so there are people that will probably believe that and are buying into that idea. And I think you can probably sell him at a bit of a profit.
Can I kind of follow up on Jarvis? He was wide receiver 14 in the last 6 games last year, and he was actually nursing broken ribs for the first half of the season. So I think, that was his worst statistical season last year. But I really think you're going to see that wide receiver 14 final 6 games Jarvis this year than the player you saw the first half of last year. So I still think he's got, like Matt said, he has some good years left in the tank.
Well, and everybody mentioned Kareem Hunt, and I think, he didn't miss a game last year, but he seemed like he might have led the league in limping to the sidelines, because he just seemed like there was a bunch of times where I was scared, he'd limp to the sidelines and be like, oh no, what happened to Kareem Hunt? So, I mean, he battled through it and made sure he was always, out there, but he could have a little bit more in the tank than he even showed. I mean, he might have been playing hurt for a decent amount of the season. So it'd be interesting to see, a fully healthy Nick Chubb, fully healthy Kareem Hunt, and what they really could do. Kareem Hunt had 53 targets last year. Do we all think he gets more than that in 2021 or less?
Less.
Similar or less. Yeah.
Interesting. Then maybe he is kind of a guy you want to sell. Chubb had 30 in the 32 range. Just clicked out of there. Does he get more?
Oh yeah. I think it's close to even.
I think yep. Chubb's going to be used a lot more, like I said before, in the passing game, just to keep defenses honest. And he's a pretty good receiver as well. So I think you're going to see a lot more Chubb screens and just a lot more. And now they might run the 2-back offense, and I'm excited to see. I'm excited to see it. Yeah.
It was 18 in 12 games, actually less than I thought. So a lot of interesting things to pay attention to, and as we get into the training camp, it's about to start rolling there, and as the preseason starts, there's always camp battles that matter, and I think there are on this team too. Christian, I'll start back over there with you. What are you paying attention to as a Browns fan, somebody that knows the team well? What are you paying attention to as we get started with camp?
The defense. No, so there are a few different areas that I'm very intrigued by. One would be defensive tackle. I think we mentioned Tommy Togiai. I think there's a chance that he steps right in and contributes. I know that's crazy of a day 3 pick, but the dude's powerful and he presents an option that they don't really have. He's kind of like the perfect counter to Billings. The other side of things would be, we also mentioned John Johnson, Grant Delpit, Ronnie Harrison is also in that room. Mm-hmm. And so I'm intrigued. I've seen Delpit got on the field in OTAs. Now I think it was just very light work. I don't think he's full go, but if he is in training camp, then what are we going to see? Are we going to see Delpit kind of overtake Harrison, or are we going to see more multiple defenses where you've got 5 to 6 defensive backs out there with 3 safeties confusing the heck out of Ben Roethlisberger, because that's easy to do these days. The other things, the offensive ones and the fantasy relevant ones that I want to pay attention to would be the wide receiver 3, like we mentioned, DPJ versus pretty much Rashard Higgins. I think Higgins should have the upper hand. I think there's a world in which Higgins is on the field in some 2 wide receiver sets. I could see a world where Donovan Peoples-Jones is as well. Just because they present a little more on the outside than someone like Jarvis would. And then the last one that I would definitely be paying attention to would be the tight end room. Over the last 5 to 6 games, and especially in the playoffs, David Njoku actually was on one of his ups. Like Matt said, he is very up and down, and a lot of the year was down, and he didn't get on the field a ton. But then when Hooper went down, he kind of came into his own. And so now that we've seen David Njoku come into his own a little bit, I'm very intrigued to see if he can win some snaps. I think he probably ends up the tight end 2, putting Harrison Bryant as the tight end 3, but I do think there is a world in which David Njoku worked on his hands this offseason, and he worked a little bit on his blocking, which was actually good down the stretch, and he emerges as like the top option, maybe just for the red zone, because he is kind of a monster athletically. So I'm very intrigued to see how that tight end room shakes out. I think we could be in for a surprise. So.
Love that. Love those points. Josh, how about you? What are you paying attention to as we get rolling in training camp?
Absolutely the defense. Yeah, like I mentioned before, that defensive tackle position will definitely be one to watch in camp. It's definitely one of our weaker positions. I want to see, like Chris said, how's Grant Delpit coming, recovering from his injury. And Matt mentioned it. I know we all mentioned it. I love that draft pick, and when he went down and in camp last year, that's a here we go again Browns moment. Thank goodness the season went well. The tight end room for me, for right now, when all 3 of them are on the team, it's hard for me to really focus in on one for this season, because Baker loves to spread the ball around, especially to his tight ends. I think he has trust in all 3 of them. I think the Hooper signing, if you're in hindsight, it's not a great move, but at the time, we're coming off a terrible season, had to really probably overpay him to get him to commits. And lastly, as Chris said, that wide receiver 3 battle is going to be huge. I love Rashard Higgins as a Browns fan. I love Rashard Higgins, but he's always going to be a much more valuable player in real life for the Browns than he is ever for fantasy. I think he'll make some big catches. Baker has his trust, but he's never going to be that huge fantasy contributor. DPJ has much more upside, especially in Dynasty. Please just stash DPJ on your bench. You will not be sad. I always say, obviously, I'm a huge Buckeye fan, but I don't think I know people like to talk about college dominator and things like that, but you can't hold any of the stats of that team up north, also known as Michigan, wide receivers against them, because Jim Harbaugh ruins all of his skill players. So I'm promising you, DPJ will be a great stash, and that is my time of bashing Michigan.
Yeah, it had to come at some point.
It had to. I could. I was like, I wanted to say this. I got to say it. So
love that. Matt, what are you paying the most attention to with this Browns team?
Well, I think Christian and Josh both really brought up great points about all the players that I would have talked about. I'll talk about some players nobody's really talking about, but first I want to bring up just from a tight end perspective, certainly Austin Hooper sounds like a bad signing. But at the same time, we got to remember that David Njoku wanted out because he didn't think Cleveland was going to be good, and he was immature. He's an athlete who basically just threw a tantrum and hoped he'd get a trade, and they told him to sit down, shut up, and see what was going on. And he figured out, oh, maybe I want to be here after all. And now he's figured out that he wants to work a little bit, and maybe this team's worth him. Or maybe now he has to prove that he's worth this team. And like Christian said, he should be one of the top 5 tight ends in the league as an athlete. Should be, but he hasn't shown it yet. So this is his time. So yes, I agree that there's a world where he should be above and beyond. But Austin Hooper's a fine blocker, much better above the rim than people realize. And he also breaks a lot of tackles and makes the first man miss more than people realize. It's just that I watch a guy down south in Matt Ryan who doesn't know how to play red zone football, if you ask me, compared to some other quarterbacks who of his stature. And Hooper could have been a much bigger weapon despite his lack of great athletic ability. That aside, guys that are worth watching. Kyle Lauletta as the quarterback 3. I don't think he's going to unseat Case Keenum at all, but he's a guy who can run. He's someone that works really well in a game where you can roll him out off play action. Very good play action quarterback as a reserve. Does there a little bit more in the tank for him so that they feel like he has a good camp? If he does, they may hold on to him, and that may be worthwhile just keeping an eye on. The whole running back battle behind Hunt and Chubb. Darnus Johnson's been fine. If you put him, basically he can catch. If the hole's there, he's going to take advantage and get what you ask from him, and that's what he is. But John Kelly has always been interesting to me out of Tennessee because he's slow, but he breaks a ton of tackles. He has great balance and strong vision, and he can catch the football. And he never really fit in with the Rams. He got drafted by them or he signed by them and never really made a splash. But I think that our man McVay, I like to pick on McVay a little bit. I think he has a very, very focused idea of what he wants from players, and John Kelly might not be one of them, which may mean he's still good. It's just that he's not their fit. Kind of like how John Elway would use Devontae Booker, even though they all knew CJ Anderson was way better as a running back, but just didn't want to do it because it was ego. So I think that Kelly's that kind of guy. And then I would add, in addition to that, in terms of other players that are worth looking at, Richard LeCounte, the strong safety out of Georgia. I know a little something about that guy. And Georgia players from just, watching them over the past 25, 30 years, if they're not great athletes who are kind of your Njoku type, that like great athletes who may not have the conceptual and technical down that they should, usually what they are is just really good football players who get drafted late or signed as free agents and wind up making the team and contributing. And LeCounte's that kind of player. He's that latter version. So I wouldn't be shocked at all if after Ronnie Harrison, we suddenly see Richard LeCounte, the leapfrog, Meander and Benton maybe on that depth chart. and wind up being a guy who can get on the field and be helpful when they need him. And he's someone who plays the alleys very well. He can tackle, and I think he's a fairly smart player. He's a better football player than he might be a great athlete. So that's a guy I want to keep an eye on.
Love that call. I'm going to get you guys out of here. Just want to quickly, Christopher asked about Hooper. I think too much dead cap to cut him after 2021. I think if that's going to happen, it's going to be 2022 based on the way I'm reading the contract.
Right. Yeah.
And then Baker, as far as a new contract, probably depends on how he plays this year, and how he plays this year is going to go a long way to determine what this Cleveland Browns team does, what their record is. So the last question I'll ask all three of you before we get you out of here is, what is the Cleveland Browns record in 2021? Remember, it's a 17-game season. So Josh, let's start with you. What do you think this Cleveland Browns record is next season?
I'm going to be cautiously optimistic and say 12-5, and God, I don't believe I'm ever saying this, but division champions of the AFC North. I think it's going to come down to us against Baltimore. Sorry, I think we're going to see crying Roethlisberger again, and I just think it's a 2-team race, and I think we're going to pull it out 12-5.
Matt, 11-5 last year. What do you think? What's this Cleveland Browns team record in 2021?
I think they're going to be 16-4, basically, when you add the playoffs and the Super Bowl. And I'm going to go and I'm going to make a wild prediction just for the fun of it, which will go to the Browns fans who just think I hate Baker Mayfield. Will be this: I think they go 16-4 with Aaron Rodgers. And Baker Mayfield winds up in Green Bay by week 1, and Browns fans don't know what to do with themselves at the beginning of the season because of the fact that they make that trade to begin with. But that's my unrealistic trade scenario. I don't the odds of that happening I think are probably 10-15% at best. But Green Bay I think is playing that game of waiting for as long as possible to see what kind of offers they can get. And if the Browns said, you know what, we'll mortgage Baker Mayfield to get Aaron Rodgers in this offense, then why not? And yeah, it's a hot take. Why not have a little fun right now in this season?
That's right.
But even with Baker, even say if they just keep Baker, which is most likely the case. Yeah, I think that they're either 16-4 or 15-5. I think they make the Super Bowl this year.
And Henry, it's only because Matt wants to keep Aaron Rodgers away from John Elway and the Broncos. That's the only motivation, right?
They're not getting him.
Christian, what do you think? What's the record for the Browns this year?
Oh, their out of division schedule is a little tough, but I think the Browns on paper have the second best roster in football behind the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are just freaking loaded, just absolutely loaded at every single position. But the Browns, they challenged that with how they beefed up that defense. And so I will say 13-4. I won't add the playoffs because I don't have any real wood to knock on at this point. So
right.
I do think they make the Super Bowl. I think, like I said, roster, it stacks up next to Tampa Bay's. And I think if they put it all together, it can happen. They'll probably lose to Tom Brady, but that's okay.
They'll run over that defense. They'll run over that defense.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, 13-4.
Dare I say the Cleveland Browns are going to be fun to watch this year, and these guys are fun to watch as always. Their Twitter handles are right there on the screen. Make sure that you are following them and paying attention to all the great work that they're putting out over the course of this offseason and over the course of the regular season as they keep all of that up. Appreciate all of them tuning in. If you are watching this and you are not subscribed to the DLF football channel right here on YouTube, make sure you do that. Go click the subscribe button. Click the like button, turn those notifications on so you know every time we do one of these team previews or when Addison is at work on his solo videos, which is very hard to do. And make sure you're supporting him. Put those comments in there and help out the YouTube algorithm and share it with a friend, but not somebody in your league. Don't do that. Don't give them that edge. Keep that for yourself. And for these guys, for DLF, I am at Calvin and Hobby, and we will see you on